What's good? It's Colleen Witt, and Eating While Broke is back for Season 3. Brought to you by the Black Effect Podcast Network and iHeartRadio. We're serving up some real stories and life lessons from people like Van Lathan, DC Young Fly, Bone Thugs and Harmony, and many more. They're sharing the dishes that got them through their struggles and the wisdom they gained along the way. We're cooking up something special, so tune in every Thursday. Listen to Eating While Broke on the Black Effect Podcast Network, iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Presented by State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
When you buy Kroger brand products, you feel like you're winning. That's because they offer proven quality at lower than low prices. In fact, we guarantee that you and your family will love how Kroger brand products taste, or you get your money back. So next time you're shopping for the family, look for delicious Kroger brand products, because they'll make you all feel like you're winning. Shop now, in-store, or online. Bakers, fresh for everyone.
It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Giants.com and the Giants mobile app. I am John Schmeelk, joined by Paul Dottino. The phone number for you is 201-939-4513. 201-939-4513. Hashtag Giants Chat. All those good things. Make sure you check it out. Big Blue Kickoff Live is, of course, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Paul, we do not have any OTAs today. This is the one day this week where we do not have any action on the field. So decided it was a good idea to do a little bit of a different show today. We've been talking about doing this for a while, given all the work we do on the draft each year. Thought we would go back and take a look. You know, we always joke people want to give grades on draft classes. The day after the draft. Well, you got to wait 3 or 4 years. Well, you know what we're going to do now?
That's what we tell them.
We're going to look back 3 or 4 years and see what the 2020 and 2021 draft classes look like. We'll talk about what the Giants did, obviously, but this is a bigger look at the draft classes as a whole and figure out maybe why certain evaluations were right, why certain evaluations was wrong, what are some of the danger factors that turn players into busts, and what players surprise and maybe figure out, okay, well, why didn't we get this guy right? And why were we wrong about him, and how can we adjust the way we look at these players moving forward? I think it'll be a useful exercise, Paul, to try to, hone in on our scouting a little bit and figuring out exactly the best way to go about our business on this.
Yeah, well, John, it's really funny because I always tell people to go hindsight, which everybody always knows is 2020, right? Hindsight is a really, really rough exercise to do unless you're able to literally peel back the calendar and go back to the time that the decisions were made, and you understand what the rationale was at the time.
And this is what we're going to try to do today.
That's the toughest part about this, and most people can't do that or won't do that. And they'll simply say, okay, you know what? Oh, they made a terrible decision. This guy was a bust. They should have known that, blah, 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 blah. All right, but at the time when the decision was made, the evidence indicated it was a logical decision. That's why you can't go back and kill it. You can only go back and kill it if the decision at the time did not make rational and reasonable sense.
Right. And we're not going to come here and we're not going out of our way to like kill players or kill teams. We're trying to figure out in the evaluation process why things worked and why things didn't. Do you want to start with 2020 or 2021? What would you like to do first?
2020 is fine. We can go back there.
So why don't we do 2020 first here, Paul? And Joe Burrow was one. The thing about Joe Burrow that I think worked out, he was only 1 year of production. And I think that was the worry with him, right? Where he was transferred, he had the one awesome year, he was surrounded by so much talent. So you're like, well, it's 1 year. He's got all these, he had Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and all these Clyde Edwards-Helaire, all these weapons around them. How much of this is Joe Burrow? Well, it turned out a lot of it was Joe Burrow. He turned out to be every bit the quarterback that we thought he was going to be, despite the fact, again, there were some legitimate questions about his overall prospect picture coming out of LSU, but he ended up hitting in terms of the quarterback position that year.
Well, as I recall, John, one of the things that people were a little bit still concerned about was his actual frame. Even though he's big at 6'3", 6'4", and was over 200 pounds, he wasn't quite as muscular, and there was a little bit of concern about some durability.
And injuries have been an issue for him.
That, to me, is about the only speck of skepticism that has actually played out, because everything else he has answered with flying colors.
I agree. All right, the other two quarterbacks in that top 10 were Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Herbert. And look, you can obviously make the argument, I think it's the correct one, that Herbert should have got taken over Tua. But I think if you go back and you ask the Dolphins, are you happy that, was that a bad pick picking Tua at 5th overall given the production he's given them? Sure, he's had some injuries. He's also made the Dolphins the last 2 years into maybe the best offense in the league when all those guys are healthy. So I think both those guys have worked out. And I think when I take a look at that, Paul, the reason Herbert, even though, frankly, his last year on tape at Oregon wasn't great, his process and everything like that, Tua's tape was better. But when you take a look, and this is kind of the thing I got into with Stephen Reese when we did our quarterback draft show back in March. We had a great conversation about this. In the end, with quarterbacks, it's important to see what they can do. And the number of things Justin Herbert is able to do on the football field, even though maybe the offense at Oregon limited some of those in the context of what they were asking him to do, his size, his speed, his arm strength, all those things, you put it together. The only question some people had was about his leadership and, being a vocal player, things like that. He checked every single one of those boxes. And even though I don't think he's put it all together yet in the National Football League. He hasn't had that MVP season yet where it's all come together. Clearly, that's a home run, transformational type of pick for the Chargers in that spot.
Yeah, I think in the last 10 years, by far, my two favorite quarterbacks in the draft coming out at the time were Justin Herbert and Josh Allen. I was all over both of those guys.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately for Herbert, the Chargers, for some reason or another, and some of it's been coaching, obviously, they've had some hiccups and they've had some dysfunction. And it's a shame because I am still, to this day, a huge Herbert fan. I would take him over to 7 days out of the week.
No, of course.
So would I.
Too. So would I. Absolutely.
So could you grade him a disappointment because the Chargers have not gotten to a Super Bowl?
I wouldn't do that. I'm not saying that at all.
Some people would.
Yeah, I mean, that's
some people would because he was so highly touted. I still think the shine is on his star. It has not come off it at all for me. Tua, I was never a big Tua fan. I'm still not a big Tua fan because the durability issue for me, I've always said, and the Dolphins have not picked up his 5th-year option. Okay?
I mean, they're going to.
Well, they haven't yet.
They're going to.
We'll see. My point is, if you're going to pick a franchise quarterback, right, a guy you think is the franchise quarterback, he better last for 2 contracts.
No, 100%.
Okay?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure that Tua is going to wind up having a 10-year career as a starter in this league. In fact, not only am I not sure, I would totally bet that he won't.
Because of injury?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
think that's fair.
He had too many injuries in his history that for me, I was like, absolutely, this is going to be a mistake. They're going to rue the day. And you know what? Tua may not even get out of this season healthy. So,
I mean, we don't know that.
No, I know we don't know that, but he's had enough. He's had enough of problems. He's one concussion away from retiring. Let's not kid ourselves.
I mean, that's a little strong, too. I mean, we don't know that.
With the issues that he's had already?
He didn't have one last year.
He didn't. Yeah,
no.
He didn't.
To say it's automatic retirement is a little bit strong. Is it a worry? Yes. To say one away from retirement, I think is a little strong.
The year before, it was real spooky.
No, sure it was.
It was
absolutely
real spooky. I'm just saying. That's all part of it. The durability factor is all part of it. And
100% it is.
I was always down on Tua. I was never a big Tua guy.
But again, when we're not trying to check boxes here, the
No.
point I'm trying to make is that I think when you looked at his package coming out, he wasn't the most physically gifted guy, right?
Right.
Doesn't have the biggest arm, not the biggest guy. And I think those are some of the things that have held him back, too, in terms of being that next-level quarterback in the NFL. So I think traits is what I'm saying for the quarterback position.
Well, he certainly
does really matter.
He certainly won for the Dolphins, and they could have done a lot worse. Let's put it that way.
A couple of the top 10 guys that I want to touch on here, Paul. Yeah. Chase Young was, he's just been, knee injury hurt. I don't think there's a whole lot. A lot of these guys want to go through injuries, and they come up and they derail these careers.
Doesn't play the run, never did, never will.
Okay,
I was never a fan of his.
I know, but that's fine. I'm not. Don't stop patting yourself on the back, please. Jesus.
Well, I'm going back. This is stuff that I said on the show.
We're not here to say I was right, I was wrong. We're here to evaluate the player and figure out what we can learn about the process.
I have no idea what I could learn about Jeff Okudah.
Well, I
really don't.
I think this is an interesting conversation. I think what I would say about him when we evaluated him is that Ohio State did not ask him to play a ton of press man coverage. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of zone, a lot of cover 3, a lot of, face the quarterback. He kind of did that kind of side saddle drop back. And he's had injury issues too. That's part of it. The same thing with Young.
Yeah.
To a lesser extent. He hasn't had the type of serious injury that Young had. But, he's a guy that, maybe we just didn't evaluate the player correctly when we watched him because we didn't see enough of that man-to-man stuff and ball production in college that translates.
I've thought about this for a while, John, because when he came out, we were at the Combine, and there wasn't a single person in Indianapolis who did not believe that Okudah would not be a top 5 pick in that draft.
They loved him.
Not one. Mm-hmm. And you looked at the tools. He understood his football smarts, his acumen. He certainly had all the tools. Plus, he also, let's face it, he also had some aggression about him, too. He wasn't a wimp. So
only 3 interceptions in 3 years at Ohio State. Maybe that was a red flag.
Well,
we should have
they
looked
didn't
at.
throw it much.
No, they didn't. You're right.
People knew. It's like, okay, why should we even bother with that guy?
You're right. No argument.
So he was not just supposed to be really good. He was supposed to dominate. Everybody and their mother thought that. I still don't know exactly how we all got that wrong. I'm sorry. I still don't get it.
Derek Brown at 7, I think, has worked out. He's been a
really
player.
Good player.
And then Isaiah Simmons at 8. I think what we talked about in the draft process was haunted him. What was that whole 2 months of conversation about? Where do you play him? How do you use him?
And you better know before you take him.
And no one's figured that out yet.
No. I hope the Giants have, but we don't know.
I would not. I think be careful of these jack of all trades, master of none guys. Have something that the player can do well and you're going to slot him in to do, and that gives you the best chance of success, I think.
He's typical of that space and time where a lot of personnel departments started to get really, really excited and attracted to athletes.
Yep.
That's really, he falls into that category. I still think, and I said it then, I thought he was the best defensive player in that draft. Well, guess what? It hasn't turned out that way production-wise. Why is that exactly? I'm still not 100% sure.
Well, again, I don't think teams have figured out how to use him.
But hopefully Shane Bowen will. That's all I could say about that. Hopefully Shane Bowen will, because his book is not fully written yet.
Yeah, C.J. Henderson at 9. He only had 2 years at Florida when he really played.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's not enough of a sample size, even though you like the traits, that you want to see a little bit more of a sample size with a guy like that. Mekhi Becton, people sometimes get mad at the media for talking about guys off the field and like weight problems and stuff like that, but sometimes it ends up being true. And you go down later in that draft too, by the way.
Yep.
Isaiah Wilson, same deal.
Oh, even worse.
Oh, obviously, those are 2 completely different categories.
No question.
And again, Becton's had injury issues too, but he has had weight issues there too. The Henry Ruggs had the off-the-field thing. Obviously, not much to say about that. Jedrick Wills, I would say, probably has been a bit of a disappointment at 10. Not a bad player, but he hasn't hit like Andrew Thomas or Tristan Wirfs had.
I agree.
So, that's what I'll say about that. Javon Kinlaw, he's a guy that wasn't really productive in college, so maybe be careful of the defensive linemen that don't put up high sack numbers, because they're not going to, maybe that's going to be a little bit of an issue. I thought that was interesting. And then there are a couple other first round this year. Jerry Jeudy, I'd say, I don't think he's been as productive as people would have liked. Be careful, small, fast, quick receivers that face off coverage a lot. It's easy for them to get open and find space.
They also have not had a quarterback for him.
True.
You know,
Also true.
even when Wilson was out there, we obviously know the issues the Broncos had with Wilson.
Yeah, so I think that's also, don't judge a guy until you see what's going on around him. I think that's fair too.
Now, on the other hand, Justin Jefferson, who, as you see, was drafted 22. How about the money he just got?
Well, and, you know, the argument too, Jalen Reagor got picked the pick before him, right?
There were a lot of people who doubted that pick, though.
No, and at the time, people thought that was a little crazy.
They did.
And I think that's a situation where trust the production a little bit, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the production numbers with Jefferson versus Reagor, obviously, again, Jefferson and Joe Burrow was on a great LSU team. Jalen Reagor was not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think production matters a little bit, Paul, and I think in the 2021 draft, there's a lot of guys where I have him marked down, production. You
right.
know, why, if the guy doesn't have production, why? Austin Jackson at 18, that's the guy the offensive tackle. You're betting on traits. Wasn't a great player, and he hasn't developed the way you want. Some guys do, some guys don't. Again, that's a developmental thing.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Love, again, he had tools. It took him a long time to develop it, just kind of the way people talked about him when he came out. Packers handle him extremely well. I think you tip your cap to that.
Yep, I agree with that.
Going to 2020 and 2021, Paul, I think both of these had linebackers late in the first round. And Patrick Queen and Jordan Brooks have been fine.
Yep.
They've been fine. I don't know if I'd like them as first-round players. I just think off-ball linebackers in the first round can be a little bit dicey. And we haven't seen a ton of those guys really hit at a high level. Probably since Roquan Smith is probably the last one that really hit as a first-round middle linebacker, maybe, unless I'm missing somebody.
No, he's really good.
I'm trying to think if there's anybody since then that's hit. I don't think so off the top of my head. Call up and let us know if I'm crazy or if I'm wrong. So I just be a little bit careful. And then another guy, Noah Igbignagene.
Yes.
He's another guy that was a complete traits player. Right?
Yep.
There wasn't a lot of production there. He was very raw.
Mm-hmm.
Be careful picking those guys in the first round. You want to pick those guys on day 2, especially day 3, of course. Sure. But I think picking those traits guys in round 1 can get a little dicey sometimes. You have to be careful with that.
Again, he was at the bottom of the round, which makes it a little bit different. You're going to weigh your priorities a tad to the left as opposed to maybe to the right when you're picking higher. I looked at the 22 positions, 11 on offense, 11 on defense. I didn't go for special teams.
Yeah, I didn't.
Because Duvernay wound up being an all-pro return guy.
Yeah, sure.
Not as a receiver, but as a return guy with Baltimore. But out of the 22 positions, okay, this is going to blow your mind. 18 of the 22 positions had a guy who wound up going to the Pro Bowl.
Wow, it's a good draft.
Out of that draft.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, that's real good.
Second round, real quick, Paul. And I noticed this, and this will kind of transition from 2020 to 2021, I guess.
Yeah.
The tops of these second rounds are always so good. Because I think teams go to bed on Thursday, they wake up and they see the guys that are left, and teams go and find the guys that they want. Even we always see so much trade action at the top of the second round, right? And I think T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr., even DeAndre Sweat. I'm not a huge fan of his, but he's been productive.
Sure.
Xavier McKinney.
Yeah.
Kyle Duggar. I mean, Robert Hunt 2 picks later.
Cole Kmet.
Jonathan Taylor 2 picks after that.
Yeah.
Cole Kmet 2 picks after that.
Antoine
Winfield 2 picks after that.
These are good players, folks.
Trayvon Diggs 5 picks after. Darryl Taylor, who's been a good player for Seattle in that mix.
Jalen Johnson.
Jalen Hurts, Cam Akers, Jalen Johnson. That top 20 picks of the second round.
Ridiculous.
It's almost better than the second 20 picks of the first round.
Absolutely. That and I wanted to actually bring that up to you because, you know.
And that's why I was so pained to give away that pick at the top of the second round for the Giants this year, because you always have such, and again, you had to, it's Brian Burns, but you always have such good players go at the top of that second round.
We talk so much about getting that extra option year for the bottom of the first round guys, right? We seem to put such a gloss on having that extra bonus, like, ooh, you know, this is so sweet. It's more sugar on the cereal. Well, the truth of the matter is, this is not the only, you can go back, this is not the only draft where the high second round was really sweet.
Well, let's shift ahead now. And this is the other thing I'll say about the second round in this draft class. Everyone says, oh, you can wait till second round for a wide receiver and it's going to be fine. Just wait till the second round. Well, let me tell you something. after T. Higgins and Michael Pittman Jr. at the top of the second round. Both guys were fringe first-round picks that year, and we talked about them over the course of the year. Here are the other second-round wide receivers, Paul. Laviska Shenault, KJ Hamler, Van Jefferson, Denzel Mims. That was the next group of wide receivers. And go to the third round.
All on the down.
Lynn Bowden Jr., converted quarterback, if I recall properly, right?
I mean,
Brian Edwards.
it was not good.
Devin Duvernay, who, again, became a good return guy. But not much of a receiver.
That's right.
So then you get to Gabriel Davis in round 4, who was the next receiver that actually played pretty well. And you had Jalen Hurts in the second round this year, too, by the way. That's one of those bet on the personality type of guys.
Well, that's why the last 2 years, though, when the wide receiver classes were deep, people got very excited.
Right.
Because you could go second and third round and find really good guys.
People love Laviska Shenault. You know, KJ Hamler ran a 4.29 or whatever it was. Like,
I remember.
Chase Claypool. I missed him. He was in the second round that year, too. That hasn't worked.
I loved Claypool.
I know you did.
He had get some stuff straight in his head.
Yeah, some mental stuff there. So, and now I want to jump to 2021 as a kind of jumping off point here, Paul, because, and then we're kind of backwards here. We'll go from the second round and up, right? So you take a look at this group in the second round. Tyson Campbell, who's been a good defensive back. He's had some injury issues, but he's been a good player. Elijah Moore. Again, he was in a terrible situation with the Jets. He was productive when he got to Cleveland.
Yes.
Solid player, not great, but solid player. Javonte Williams, really good running back until he got hurt. Javon Holland, all-pro level. I don't think he's made an all-pro team yet, but he's going to if he hasn't. He's a really good player. Landon Dickerson, who just got paid over $20 million a year.
Really
Christian Barmore, who's one of the best defensive tackles for the Patriots. Tevin Jenkins, who, after a slow start in Chicago, has kind of figured it out, and he's developed into a starter for them. Levi Onwuzurike for the Lions. He's turned out to be a pretty decent player. Go down the list. Let's see. Then it kind of falls off a little bit. So you kind of got to pick 40, 41 with this group.
Right.
Then you had a little bit of a drop-off in terms of the second round in 2021. But again, the top of that second round, you had some really good players.
The only big name who I seem to remember was a potential fringe first rounder and then went early second and has not done real well was Liam Eichenberg, the offensive lineman out of Notre Dame.
Yeah, they moved him around a little bit. He hasn't found the home.
He has never developed into what he was supposed to be.
And we liked him, too.
Yeah, everybody liked him. He was a fringe first rounder.
And Sam Cosmi got picked at 51. At least he's kind of developed into a starter for them in Washington.
Asante Samuel Jr., pretty good.
Yep, he's a good player at 47. You're right.
John didn't go down that far.
No, you're right, though, Pearson. No, absolutely. He's probably the next best player. Then you have Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah that went to the Browns. But again, that was a medical deal. That's why he dropped.
Yes. Well, Pete Warner's a pretty good player.
And
Creed Humphrey's got to the Pro Bowl twice
and
at center. He was the end of the second round.
And I'm happy you brought him up. That's one of the Senior Bowl guys, right?
Yeah.
Where he was just dominant there. No one could beat him. He was like Jackson Powers Johnson this year. So I think taking the Senior Bowl seriously matters too.
The number that I came up with is, again, 22 positions. 13 of the 22 positions wound up being Pro Bowl players out of the 2021 draft.
And you would expect it to be fewer than 2020 because they've had one less year in the league to do it. So that makes sense. And we talked about the just wait till the second round wide receivers. You're going to be fine. Well, here's the second round wide receivers in 2021.
Try to jog your memories, folks.
Elijah Moore, who again we talked about, turned out to be a decent player. Rondell Moore, Dwayne Eskridge, Tutu Atwell, Terrace Marshall Jr. Then you go to the round 3, Josh Palmer, who's actually a decent player.
Marshall was a very big disappointment because he had a lot more good ratings for him coming out.
De'Ami Brown in the third round, who I liked a lot. He hasn't worked out. Amari Rodgers, third round pick, hasn't worked out. Anthony Schwartz, third round, hasn't worked out. And then you have Nico Collins in the third round, who...
Yeah.
God, I love Nico Collins, Paul. I think both of us are actually really high on Nico Collins.
We did.
It took him a while.
We did.
But he eventually figured it out. So, again, I know everyone says, you get wide receivers in the second and third round. You can. You're also going to have a lot of bad ones in the second and third round, too. So, it's just something to keep in mind as we move forward. That's one thing that struck me going, out of all the kind of lessons that I saw, like day 2 wide receivers, not as much of a sure thing as you think they are.
Again, it depends on what that class is going to present. And we have talked many times over these last 2 years, these were supposed to be exceptionally deep at receiver. So I'd like to think the odds are a little better, John. We still,
I would hope so too.
We still need to see more in the next year or two, but I think the potential is certainly there.
All right, and I thought there were some strong first round lessons here in this group here too, Paul. We'll do the quarterbacks last. We'll work our way back up. There were 3. I can count Joe Tryon, but his production was actually pretty good. But there were 3 pass rushers picked in the back half of this first round, Paul. In Kwity Paye, Odafe Owe, who at that point I believe was Jason Owe when he got drafted.
Yeah.
And Peyton Turner, who all tested well. They had the size and speed, but they did not have production in college. They did not have big-time sack numbers. And in my opinion, and there's been some injuries involved with a couple of those guys, but neither of those 3 guys have hit. Kwity Paye's finally starting.
Paye's the only one.
And he's starting. He only started this year to starting to do well this year.
Correct.
But, again, I think be careful of pass rushers without college production because that's going to show up. If you're a good pass rusher, it's going to show up. Again, bet on traits is fine, but you got to be careful about betting on traits too early because sometimes it doesn't develop.
In looking at this list, I mean, I actually wrote down, and the list that I'm working off of with all of these comments is I wrote down a starting 22 from the 2020 draft and the 2021 draft. And Phillips and Rousseau, who were both graded as about as high a pass rushers in that class. Remember, it was not supposed to be a great pass rushing class, but those guys were 2 of the top guys. As it turned out, they are the 2 best pass rushers in the class outside of Micah Parsons, who was obviously a novelty.
And he wasn't considered a pass rusher when he got picked. He was considered an off-ball linebacker.
We talked about that too.
Correct. Absolutely. You're right. And the reason I didn't include Phillips in that conversation is because he was productive in college.
He was.
Right?
He was.
The injuries was the only issues with him, right?
That was the whole gamble.
Right? And now
how high do you take him?
And now what does he have now for his ACL?
Yep.
So, and that's the other thing I noticed too. Him and Rashad Bateman both had injury issues in college. Both have had injury issues in the pros. Sometimes past injuries do determine how healthy you're going to be in the future. The old smart, tough, dependable conversation.
We know that there are teams out there who obviously have medical staffs who have done legitimate scientific studies on not only how often does a guy get hurt, but what are the specific injuries that he has.
Oh, by the way, Caleb Farley is another guy you can throw into that list.
Oh, no question.
He was injury issues in college and just hasn't been able to stay healthy. So
Absolutely.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure he was in the list.
So there's a scientific. I'm sure there's scientific evidence that, again, how many injuries the guy had and what were the injuries in terms of what is the proclivity for him to have those injuries or other injuries once he gets to the NFL. I'm sure those studies exist, and the NFL front offices must have them, John.
Yep.
But generally speaking, and this is why, when we talked about the quarterback out of Washington this year, right, with that injury history, I'm sorry. He would have been, and many teams had him off their boards, and he was certainly off my board.
How about Latu?
To some
you
people,
put him in the same category.
I would have been very, very leery about taking him.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Very, very leery.
You're being consistent.
To tell me he was wiped off my board.
Would you have picked him in the first round?
No.
Okay. That's simple. Fair enough.
No, I couldn't. Would I have taken a flyer like in the 4th round? There's no way he was going to make it.
Would you have done day 2?
Probably not.
Oh, okay, yeah. So then he wasn't off your board, but he was
deep.
You were scared.
He was deep.
Fair enough.
I have an issue with those things. That to me, that's a bigger issue than maybe for others.
No, I get that, Paul. Because nothing, if you look at these two, nothing can derail a promising career like a bad injury. It's just it happens again and again and again. And sometimes one injury leads to another, and you can never recover. You never become what you're supposed to.
Well, the worst part about it, John, is if you take a first-round pick, right? Because not only is he not going to be available to you if he's got a whole bunch of injury issues, but think about the fact you paid him first-round money.
Yeah, and you lost the chance to pick a different guy.
Exactly.
At that slot.
It's a triple whammy. Mm-hmm. He's not available. You lose the first-round money, and you miss the chance to get somebody else. It's a triple whammy. That sucks.
Yeah. A couple other things. I want to touch on real quick. Xavier Collins, I'll put into the Isaiah Simmons conversation. What is he? Is he an off-ball linebacker? Is he a pass rusher? How are you supposed to use him? And these tweeners are hard. It worked out for Micah Parsons, right? Because they found the one spot and they stuck him there and it worked. But Zaven Collins has been a bad player, but he hasn't. It's not the 15th overall pick in that draft. Like he hasn't 16th. He hasn't
lived
that
up to
way.
that. No,
correct.
There's a yellow flag for me on every tweener. You know that. I've always had an
100%.
analogy to those guys.
Yeah, always have a plan for how you want to use the player, and make sure have a plan, and make sure you've seen the player do well what you want him to do. Like, don't draft a guy and then try to change him. Bad idea. Bad idea. A couple of the guys I want to mention here, Paul.
Yeah.
Rashawn Slater. He was the guy that some people got afraid of because of the arm length and stuff like that. You know what the lesson is there? Trust the tape.
Because he can play.
Because we saw he could play in college.
There was never a doubt about that.
And he played in the NFL. So don't let arm length matters, but don't let it be the end-all, be-all. If he can do it in college at a high level at offensive tackle, there's a decent chance. If he has he needs the athleticism still, but the length, you can get away with it if your technique is good enough.
A scout once told me, John, he said, the thing that will direct me off of that particular situation is if he did really, really well in his games against top-flight one-on-one competition.
It's a good one.
He said to me, I won't ignore his measurements. He said, you can never ignore a guy's measurements, but I'll put less emphasis on the guy's measurements if I know in his most important games against his toughest foes, he went out there and kicked tail.
I agree. All right, two more things. The big debate, should the Bengals select Penei Sewell to protect Joe Burrow, or should they draft Jamar Chase for Gerbo to throw the ball to? Guess what? Either one would have been great.
Yeah.
I think you can't argue with Jamar Chase. You couldn't have argued if they picked Penei Sewell. Both guys ended up being great players. They're both at premium positions. It worked.
It did.
So
it absolutely worked.
For all that hemming and hawing and debating, whichever way they would have went, it would have worked out just fine for them, which I think is interesting. And again, we're seeing how wide receivers are getting paid now. We talked about second-round wide receivers. Well, picking a wide receiver in the top 10, it tends to work out. Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, all top 10 players. All of those have been hits.
Can Malik Neighbors work out?
But that was the argument we had, right? Some people are just draft a wide receiver later, pick the tackle early. But by the way, and it is hard to get tackles later in the first round and the second round.
Sure it is.
Looking at these drafts, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Finally, the quarterbacks. And this goes back. The other big theme, Paul, and I've mentioned this a couple times, even if you like a player's traits, if he's not actually a really good player with really good production in college, be very careful. Be very careful. I'm looking at you, Zach Wilson, and Trey Lance. Now, Trey Lance has had a lot of injury issues too. So that has, in fairness, been a factor to him. And Zach Wilson had a terrible situation around him with the Jets. Bad offensive line and all that stuff. But neither one of those players had this goes back to the Parcellism, right, with drafting quarterbacks. They did not have a long, sustained track record of success playing quarterback in college at a high level. And it did not work out. Well, at least so far, it has not worked out for those two players.
The shame of it is, when I go back to a lot of the things that Bill taught us over the years, is that the one thing that is not applicable anymore because guys come out so soon.
It's the number of starts, right? That rule.
How do you?
It worked this year, though. You had two guys that were in college forever.
I know, but
actually three, right? You had Penix, you had Nix, and you had Jaden Daniels. They're all 5-year quarterbacks.
That is true. But what really happens now is that the bulk of the class coming out does not meet all of the Parcells quarterback qualifications. I mean, they practically eliminate themselves if you're going to hold firm to the test.
It's hard.
It's because the game is different now, and the guy's coming out sooner, and that's just the way it is. And the transfers, and it just changes everything. So as much as I love Bill, and I still do believe in his quarterback checklist, I also believe that there's a couple of things on there that you kind of have to back off on.
Fair. And finally, Trevor Lawrence is the first overall pick. I would say somewhat like Herbert, and Lawrence was even more highly touted than Herbert was coming out, obviously.
He was. Only because Herbert's kind of sunk in that last year.
Yeah. But frankly, again, his tape at Oregon in his final year was not great.
The year before.
It was better.
Spectacular.
Correct. But would you consider Lawrence's early career so far a slight disappointment?
I'd say he's probably just about where he should be.
I would consider it a slight disappointment.
Okay, we'll split hairs.
In his
That's
fourth,
okay.
I guess this was his third year this past year, right?
Well, he has made a Pro Bowl already.
He almost led the league in turnovers, though, last year. It's a lot.
Well, again, Doug Peterson has done a lot for that organization.
Yeah, that's why I thought
Urban Meyer destroyed the Jaguars.
Right, but I
single-handedly.
figured in Peterson's second year, I would have seen a little bit more of a bump. Now, he did play through that high ankle sprain late in the year, and he was hurt. That's all fair. But I think, some of the stuff we saw from him in Clemson where it was a lot of one-read stuff, get the ball out quick. He's not a guy that's going to sit back in the pocket and, scan the whole field in a lot of ways, and he's still not that guy.
No.
So maybe we haven't seen that development like we thought. So,
put it this way. If you're going to stack up Lawrence next to Herbert, I would have taken Herbert even at the draft, and I would still take Herbert today if I had my pick between those two guys.
If I had to pick Herbert today, I'd pick Herbert. If I had to pick today, I picked Herbert. I think if coming out, I probably would have picked Lawrence ahead of him. Just because
that's okay too.
Just because it was close. I just didn't like Herbert's last year at all.
I know.
I watched it and it just wasn't good.
I understand.
It was all dump offs and
I understand.
It was just bad. It was just not fun. But again, really talented player.
So
really good. So hope you guys learned something. I know I did. I thought have a plan for your player. Make sure there's some level of production in college. It doesn't have to be like the best player at their position. But it has to be some level of production. And, I skipped over these two guys. Would you consider Najee Harris and Travis Etienne successful first-round running back picks?
Not as high as they should have been.
Don't pick off-ball linebackers or running backs in the first round.
Yeah.
Those are the lessons I took out of this. And second-round wide receivers and day two wide receivers, buyer beware. Looking at these two draft classes, those are the lessons that I kind of came out of looking at.
I will give you one more.
Sure.
And that is, there is always going to be a superstar at a position. You just got to find him. Sometimes it's just not that obvious. And why do I say that? Because if you go through the 2020 draft and 18 out of the 22 positions have had a Pro Bowl player, the 2021 draft is 13 out of 22. But what happens with the overlap? All 22 positions, every single one of them, John, between those 2 years, there's a Pro Bowl player at every single position, which means...
And I'm looking at the list, most of these guys are first and second rounders.
Yeah, but the point being that it's pretty hard to go into a draft and say, you know what, we don't have a guy who can be a real stud at any position.
No,
they're there. You got to find them. You got to find them.
Yeah.
And it may be difficult to find them, okay? Maybe it turns out a guy like Jefferson in Minnesota, gets bypassed by a bunch of people a number of times, and it's like, well, maybe they had an eye on him and other people didn't, and so he dropped as far as he did. But the point is, he was there. He was available. Mm-hmm. Somebody just had to find him and make the pick.
And by the way, the Giants picking at number 20, Kadarius Toney, checks two of the boxes I talked about. Injuries.
Oh, yeah.
College production. Right? You love all the traits and the athleticism and stuff. Mm-hmm. College production wasn't there.
Nope.
Not for a long period of time. So these are things you got to worry about when you look at these guys.
No doubt.
And you try to figure things out. All right, 201-939-4513. Guys, one of my favorite episodes of the Giants Huddle podcast I've done all offseason is up right now. I talked to Cynthia Freeland, who's the analytics queen over at NFL Network, and we basically did, it was almost all 45 minutes. Maybe it was, the last 5 minutes we jumped around a little bit, but it was almost all how she studies and looks at offensive linemen and specifically what physical and athletic traits are most determine how likely an offensive lineman is going to be successful. That short conversation we had at the Combine for about 5 minutes with her about that, which I thought was fascinating. I don't know if you've listened to it yet. You need to go and do it.
I haven't heard the new one
but
yet, no.
It is there is some really good detail in there.
The problem is we wouldn't have access to those measurements like she does.
No, we don't. But she actually did say she did explain specific when you watch the Combine, even if you don't get the measurements, what to watch on all the drills to keep an eye on.
Then absolutely, folks, watch it.
Which is good. It was really good. And she also, a little nugget, I asked her, I said, just out of curiosity, Evan Neal, the first 2 years haven't gone the way you want him to. What did you, based on all your criteria,
Yes.
she goes, yeah, he was one of my favorite offensive linemen that I've looked at. He met every criteria that she had. So it's nothing physical that's really holding him back. So I still have hope that he can figure it out.
He has been banged up.
So.
That's about the one physical thing he can point to.
Correct. Right. So hopefully if he can stay healthy for this year and be on the field for all 17 games and hopefully more, he can start playing at a higher level more consistently at right tackle. We'll see how that goes. All right, so go check that out, Giants Huddle Podcast, Giants app, giants.com/podcast. Search for Giants Huddle on your favorite podcast platform. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave that 5-star positive review for all of our podcasts. It really helps us out. But again, I cannot recommend that Cynthia Freeland Huddle enough. Really a fun interview, and she was really generous with her time. And you can tell she enjoys talking about it. So it was a lot of fun. Go check that out. All right, 201-939-4513. I appreciate you guys being patient for us, so we will get to your calls right now. Let's go to Cliff in New York. He will lead us off. Cliff, hi, you're on Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Hey, guys. I got a question about what you just presented about the drafts from our own experience.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, I had a superhero, Marvel superhero nomination for you.
Okay, give me both.
From the Fantastic Four, Mr. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
You know how he extends his arm?
Reed Richards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who?
Reed Richards.
Reed Richards is
that's his,
yes.
That's
yes.
his character's name?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good, Paul.
Yeah, there was a tendency to pay mostly attention to Jessica Alba, but when I saw this guy...
Okay. Okay.
When I saw this guy, I thought...
Cliff, understandably so, my friend. I'll just leave it at that.
And do you happen to know what her name was?
Oh, yeah. Do you know what her character's name was? Good question, Paul.
No, I don't.
Sue Storm,
anyway.
by the way. Just
Exactly.
for the record.
That's right,
Yep.
Storm, yeah. Well, anyway, when I saw this guy's arms, I thought of football right away. That's a heck of a catch radius. So from the other day in OTAs, maybe Hyatt gets that.
Hyatt's not the longest guy in the world.
No.
Who would
Well,
be?
it's the reach.
You know who was kind of Mr. Fantastic, and he's not a wide receiver. JPP had some Mr. Fantastic.
Yes, he
in
did.
It with those
Oh, yeah.
arms.
Yes, he did.
Oh, yeah. All right. And then I had an animal. You got...
No, Cliff, hold on 1 second. Paul's confused. So the other day, we somehow got into a conversation of comparing positions on the football field to animals.
Okay.
So, and we kind of went through a couple different things. I'll talk to you about some of the ones we came up with. But
Yeah.
Cliff, what is your animal and for what position?
Okay, well, in the tight end room, to complement the elk that you gave to the rookie, I want a rhinoceros for Bellinger, and it's also in honor of our former player who was a hybrid human-animal, and the last championship team only lasted a couple of years.
Henry Hynoski?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, see, now I would say Rhino would be fullback. I wouldn't make tight ends rhinos because you want the fullback to charge and really nail somebody.
Yes.
So I think rhinoceros for fullback is excellent, Cliff. I think that's very good.
And besides, rhinoceroses are not extinct as fullbacks seem to be in this league.
Yes, that is true.
Well, that's what I thought of. Yeah, and I started thinking of the H-back, which I never understood. Wasn't that a hybrid tight end?
Yeah, it's a hybrid thing.
Yeah, it's a hybrid.
What's your question on the draft, Cliff?
If the example of drafting somebody who for another need than what they were famous for, we had a cornerback at the end of the first round not long ago who was considered the best press cornerback in the nation, and we proceeded to play him in zone.
Oh, Corey Webster?
Mm-hmm.
No, after him, DeAndre Baker.
Well,
I don't think, Cliff. I got to be honest with you. You could have played DeAndre Baker in any defense under the sun with what was going on with that kid.
It was not going to turn out well.
It was not going to go well.
Too much off the field, huh?
I just don't think he is football character off the field, all that stuff. Just put it into one big
his work habits did not exactly enthrall people.
And frankly, that was not a good pick. And when me and Paul went to the combine that year, and we talked about this on the air, so we're not breaking any news here.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone we talked to, and we even got stronger words off the air from people than on the air. DeAndre Baker showed up to the NFL Combine completely unprepared to do interviews, to do the workouts, to do anything. And if you're going to show up unprepared to the biggest job interview of your life, that's probably not a great sign that he's going to come prepared to work every day.
He got drafted on his tools. He did not get drafted on the other boxes on the checklist.
Well, his tape was great, though.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
his tools.
Well, tools, when you say tools, you think athletic testing,
well,
right? So his play was actually great. Like, if you watch his tape, nobody ever caught passes on him.
The skills and the talent were clearly there.
He was phenomenal on tape.
The evidence
his tape
was great.
But again,
the other boxes were not good.
And Cliff, that's why when we talk about these draft processes, everyone likes to say, well, he does this, he's great at this, and that's all that matters. It's a package. You have to take the off-the-field stuff, the mental stuff, the hard work stuff, the tape stuff, the workout stuff. It doesn't matter. All this stuff has to get put together to determine how good you think a player is going to be. It's not easy.
And quite honestly, the Giants had a solid report on his attitude coming out, but
they had no red flags on
nothing.
His off-field character.
But he's one of those guys, and I have seen many in my years of doing this who they got to the pros, they got the professional contract, they got a little bit of money, and then all of a sudden mentally they go off track. He's not the first one who did that.
As it turns out, the not being prepared for the combine should have been the red flag that.
In retrospect.
Yeah.
In retrospect.
Yeah. Because look, when it happens at the time, Cliff, you can say things like, and appreciate the call, by the way, thank you. You could say things like, all right, maybe he was sick. He had something going on in his personal life. It was a bad week. Anybody can, be off if there's a specific thing that's involved there. So it's hard to, without doing the extra research behind it, to make a summary judgment based off of one bad situation, one bad or 2 bad days. But in retrospect, that should have been a huge red flag that scared people off him. But look, we were talking about him as a first-round pick, that year in the draft. It's not like he wasn't in that conversation when the Giants picked him.
No, not at all. And this is why when I said at the beginning of the program,
and they traded up for him too,
hindsight
really
and 2020 is always going to be perfect.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You have to go back to the time the pick was made and say, okay, what's the evidence you had then? Not the evidence you have now.
But in retrospect, if you're going to use a first-round pick on a guy, don't have that one event even sitting there in his profile that scares you. Just there's so many other players. Just pick somebody else.
At this point, I think that's buyer beware. And we've learned more and more over the years that those kinds of things can actually mean more down the line than you thought at the original time.
And sometimes it works out, right? Like you have some guys where you had bad reports on and they turned out to be great NFL players and you've had no problems with them. They've been fantastic. Mm-hmm. But other guys, it hasn't gone that way.
Dan Marino's the best one of all. Okay? Dan Marino's the best one of all. There were so many concerns about him off the field with things that were supposedly going on and habits that he had, that guy fell like a stone. You think the Dolphins are upset they took him?
By the way, for the youngins out there, I forget who posted it up. Someone put up about like a 3-minute Dan Marino highlight package up on Twitter last week of just all his throws down the field. Oh, man.
That's a lot of tape.
And it wasn't all of them, but it was like a 3-minute package. There was probably like a dozen throws on there, maybe 15 throws on there.
Dude. It was awesome.
And look, I'm young enough, or old enough, I should say, where I don't remember prime like 1983 to 1988 Marino.
Okay.
A little young for that. I was more early 90s Marino when he was still awesome, by the way. It's not like that was like bad Marino. So I remember awesome Marino, but even me rewatching some of those throws he made down the field, oh, dude, like off his back foot with the rusher at his face, just flicking it, and the ball comes out like 1,000,000 miles an hour. Oh, man.
Pure arm. Pure arm. He was about as good as there ever was. Just pure arm.
Who do you think? And
that's how I felt with Favre, because I got to watch kind of the second half of his career, and I was like, oh my God, some of these throws.
Oh yeah, early Favre,
various angles.
Ridiculous. Yeah. I asked my brother this because he's 10 years older than me, so he saw Marino throughout his whole career. Better player, Marino or Elway?
Depends on the characteristics that you want.
Well, for you, who do you think was a better player, Marino or Elway?
For me, I would have rather have had Elway because of the way that he drove comebacks. Marino,
and his legs? Was his legs part of that too, being able to run and stuff like that?
Not as much. Just the fact that Elway brought his team from behind in so many critical situations. There's something to be said for that.
Okay, that's fair.
That's all. Elway was the comeback kid of his generation.
There was
nobody like him.
He liked Marino better. He thought he was.
Well, Marino had the better arm.
Correct.
I mean, Elway had a cannon too, but Marino with a very, very small windup. Didn't even have a windup.
Oh, he had the quickest release in the league.
He just would flick it, and it would like come out like a BB, and distance was not an issue with him.
And very accurate too. Just really, he was just
without question
pure passer. I think Marino is the better player.
Absolutely,
right. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you another guy who doesn't get nearly as much credit for being a pure passer is Dan Fouts.
Yeah, Fouts is. I don't remember any.
Oh
Fouts.
My goodness,
I was way too. I've seen all the Air Coryell highlights with Jefferson and Winslow and who's the third guy?
Joyner.
Yeah, thank you.
And just to wing it. If you just wanted your quarterback to go back there and wing it, oh, man, you're not going to do much better than those guys.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, let's go to Hugo in New Jersey and then DJ in Virginia. You'll be up next after that. Hugo, what's going on?
Hey, good afternoon, guys.
What's up?
Hey, John, I did listen to the podcast with Cynthia Freeland and found it fascinating. And only on that podcast will you get a statistics lesson that correlation does not confirm causality and a reference to R squared.
Yeah.
So I thought...
Paul has no idea what you're talking about, but that's okay. Now,
okay.
And we also had this was a great line in the podcast. So at the end of the podcast, she was talking about how when offensive linemen are getting in position, you're kind of supposed to have like your butt out and your back arched, right? So you're kind of in position to block. And she goes, the way an offensive lineman coach explained it to me when I was doing my study, how he explained it. It's like how the girls stand in the pinup model calendars at the end. And I'm like, Cynthia, I got to be honest with you. I don't think the kids know what pinup calendars are these days.
Not.
So and she goes, well, now you just sent a lot of people to Google, didn't you, John? I'm like, yep, I guess I did.
Yeah. Hey, she did her whole college thesis on this stuff.
I know. She was great.
Yeah.
To get into it as detailed as she can, I give her a lot of credit.
I got one for you, Paul, and Hugo, hang with us.
Yeah.
The one thing I think was interesting, she said maybe the number one correlation from the combine, how much an offensive lineman's posterior raises up in the air from when his butt passes the white line at the start of the 40 to the 10-yard mark. If their rear end doesn't go up more than an inch and a half, I swear to God, like
again,
their chance
I don't want to be the one who measures that.
Their chance
I
of
really
being
don't.
successful skyrockets because it shows their ability to keep their butt low and have good bend, and that creates balance, which allows you to be a better offensive lineman. It's little minute things like that she talks about that's just fascinating as all hell.
I understand the logic.
Anyway.
I don't know if from the stands or from the TV we could tell that though.
No, probably not. But I mean, you could probably tell. You could probably tell if a guy gets upright really quickly in his 40. Though. I mean, you could probably see that.
Yeah.
Right?
I wouldn't get it down to inches, but you could probably see it.
But you can have a feel for it. Anyway, Hugo, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Well, she has a unique talent. I mean, she's obviously brilliant, but doesn't take herself too seriously either.
Absolutely, she's great.
Digestible. Yeah. So guys, one of the things that this whole Waller situation had me thinking about NFL trades and what is needed to consummate an NFL trade. I know a player must pass a physical.
Yeah.
But I am wondering are there any like full disclosure requirements? Here's what I'm thinking.
Well, by the way, Hugo, just for the record, a team can waive that. Like if a team doesn't want to give a player a physical, they don't have to. Like that.
Right.
That's a team's choice.
Mm-hmm.
Most teams don't make them do it, obviously, but they could say, all right, no, we don't need the physical, we're good.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going in a different direction, right? So I think I mentioned a prior podcast that one of the things I learned last year from Darren Waller's own mouth is that he had a chronic nerve issue in his hamstring, something I didn't know. Well, I mean, there was no way for me to know.
No, I mean, us either, right.
Right? So when I think about a physical, I think about a doctor putting a stethoscope on you and asking you to open your mouth wide.
Different physical.
I'm wondering, what type of physical is involved? I mean, is the player put through a full body MRI scan? So in other words, how is something like this picked up? And one of the things I think about from business is when you do due diligence, sometimes there's a full disclosure requirement, right, where the other party meets with you, tells you, for example.
Yeah, usually, Hugo, teams will request all the full medical reports from the team that's trading the guy, including test results, scans, all that stuff. And we've actually had it. I'm not sure if it was the NFL or the NBA. There was a team that sued another team when they acquired a player, and there ended up being an injury that the other team knew about and they didn't disclose at the time of the trade. So there are, to your point, there are rules like that where you can require the other team to make that full disclosure. And if they don't, you can end up taking legal action.
There have been trades voided, too. And I can't remember specific names of players, but I know deals have been voided because the new team then does a complete diagnostic and workup and says, wait a minute, there's something going on here.
And look, there's a chance the first team maybe doesn't know about it, but if you find out that there had been prior tests and they knew about it and hit it, that's where you get into trouble.
Remember the shortstop that the Mets were going to sign, the free agent shortstop a couple years ago?
Carlos Correa.
Correa, that's right. It was Correa.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, they go through the diagnostic, and he's got a foot issue.
It was an ankle or a foot, right?
And they're like, you know what? Our doctors are thinking this may not be a good gamble. And even after 2 days or whatever, it leaked out that they were going to sign him. Now they're backing off because the complete diagnostic had a red flag. That happens in all sports.
Okay. So look, that gives me comfort that the Giants had pretty good insight into what the nature of his injury was when they consummated when they went ahead with the trade.
Yeah, there was a reason he only cost a third-round pick, Hugo.
Yeah, and this is the point. I wouldn't have done knowing that information. I wouldn't have done the trade. And one thing I've learned over time is that you think about it's only giving up a third-round compensatory. Inevitably, it happens. There's a player on the board,
of course,
right when that pick comes up that you like, right?
Hey, look, at the time, Hugo, I think all of us called it kind of a high upside swing, and you hope it hits, and there was always a risk. And again, we'll see what happens with Darren Waller this year. We don't know if he's going to retire or whatever. There was always a risk that it wasn't going to turn out well. You're dealing for a 30-plus-year-old player that has a bad hamstring and hadn't played well in 2 or 3 years. So you knew there was a risk, but I think all of us knew the team needed another weapon on offense badly coming off of a playoff season, and I think that's why we all thought it was worth the swing, and it ended up being the 97th or 8th overall pick in that year's draft, something like that, right?
It was compensatory.
Yeah,
it was at the end of the third round. It was, look, that's fine. You have to take a risk every once in a while. I was just worried that maybe the Raiders had pulled the fast one on us.
No, I doubt that.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Hugo. No, good call. Appreciate it, man. All right, let's wrap things up with DJ in Virginia. DJ, you're on Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
We're good, man. What's going on?
All right. Sorry I missed you guys' call. I tried to call in when SciTech was there because I know he just came back from his honeymoon in Japan.
Yeah.
And I had spent 3 years in Japan, so it was kind of cool. I didn't know.
Were you working there, DJ? Were you military? What were you?
Yeah. I was stationed there for 3 years.
Thank you for your service.
Yes,
appreciate
thank you
that.
for your service.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to call because a couple of weeks ago because I saw something. I think it was on Speak Up or something like that, where they were comparing Daniel Jones to Jalen Hurts, and it kind of bothered me because it was like there's like no context there, when they start comparing them, and it's like Jalen Hurts has 2 number 1 receivers. He's got the number 1 offensive line. He's got the defense that had 70+ sacks a year ago, and it's like, how can you say Daniel Jones is like trash, but say Jalen Hurts is awesome? And it's like half the time, I don't claim to be a scout or anything, but like when I look at Jalen Hurts and I'm evaluating him, half the time it looks like he just throws the ball up to A.J. Brown. You know what I mean?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's, like, if you put, for example, if you took Jalen Hurts and you put him on the Giants for the first, was it 5 games before Daniel got hurt last year? First 5 games?
Well, we got hurt twice.
It was 5, right? It was the first 5 games.
He got hurt twice.
Yeah, if you put him on the Giants roster for the first 5 games last year, that's not going any differently.
I don't think so.
Right.
Again, I'm not saying they're the same. Look, Jalen Hurts has proven a lot more than Daniel Jones. Has been much more productive. Right now, it's impossible not to argue that he's the better quarterback. But yeah, Daniel Jones' career looks a lot different if he has the ecosystem around him that Jalen Hurts has in Philadelphia. No question about it.
Look, a Shore band that plays at the local bar is never going to sound like a symphony orchestra. They just don't have the instruments or the manpower to sound like a symphony.
Or
it's not going to happen.
To put it a different way, you take one band, you put them in a bar at the Jersey Shore, then you put them in Madison Square Garden with different speakers, a different sound system.
Yeah.
The band's going to sound different.
That's true too.
You know what I mean?
Right.
That's true too.
Yeah, and my other point I had real quick, I was watching, I think it's called Nightcap with Shannon and Ocho Cinco.
Oh, God bless you.
And they brought up this point about teams not really trying to win, because I think they were talking about the Dallas Cowboys and how, Jerry Jones talks about being all in, but they really didn't do much in the offseason.
Jerry Jones kind of just says stuff now. I wouldn't, honestly, I'm serious. I wouldn't take Jerry Jones literally for most of the stuff he takes. He's Jerry Jones. He's on the older side now. I think he kind of just, Jerry likes to talk sometimes. And I think people sometimes take what he says a little bit too literally.
In recent years, his son Steven has made many more of the football decisions because he's a lot smarter. Honestly.
Well, I think Steven runs the day-to-day, but I think all the big decisions still file through Jerry. He still has to approve everything.
Well, Steven talked him out of Baker Mayfield.
No, Johnny Manziel.
And Johnny Manziel.
Johnny Manziel.
Yeah, it was Manziel. You're right. It was Mayfield. It was Manziel. That's right.
And they took Zach Martin instead. Thanks, Steven.
I mean, Steven is the guy who understands more of old-fashioned football 101, and since he's had much more influence on the team, they have become a much better club.
Right, that's true. But he made an interesting point when he kind of was talking about it being more like business. Like, hey, this is a $1 billion company. Like, hey, if we look at it as a business, it really doesn't matter whether we're trying to win the Super Bowl, whether we're a team that's in first place or a team that's in 14th place, we're still making billions. You know what I mean?
Well, there's one thing you can say about Jerry, aside from everything else. From a economic perspective and a financial perspective, he has hit touchdown after touchdown after touchdown.
He's the best. He's the best businessman in the NFL.
There is no doubt about that.
Like, we wouldn't have jobs. Like, Jerry Jones is what basically he started team sponsorship deals, eventually team content. Like, the Cowboys, we wouldn't have jobs here. None of us, if it wasn't for what Jerry Jones did. Him and the NFL got into a lawsuit over it, with the Cowboys selling their own sponsorship deals for their stadium and everything. So, he's changed everything in the league. And, I think there's a difference, too. It's not that they're not trying to win. It's that they're not willing to mortgage their future to do everything to win 1 year now. Like, some of these teams, the Saints, the Eagles to an extent, the Rams to another extent, right? They're willing to just pay on the credit card, and eventually when it hits, you're going to be in a real bad situation. And frankly, that's what the Cowboys used to do. You remember when the Cowboys used to backload all their contracts and all that stuff? They had to let DeMarcus Ware go, one of their best defensive players in franchise history, because they got so far over the cap, they had to cut him. They cut DeMarcus Ware, who went on to win a Super Bowl and have multiple double-digit sack years in Denver. He was still a really good player when they let him go.
No question.
And, they've learned their lesson that you don't necessarily have to completely sell out your future to try to win now. That might frustrate fans that always want to sign the glitzy free agent. We have those conversations here too. Teams want to renegotiate Dexter's contract, Andrew Thomas's contract, Bobby Okereke's contract to free up money to sign a big free agent. That might work for 1 year or two and for a short-term thing. Operating that way over a long period of time can be very problematic. The Eagles have done a good job, but in about 3 or 4 years, the Eagles are going to start feeling the heat on all these contracts too, with all these deferred years on them. So the bill always comes due eventually, DJ.
Right. Okay.
Appreciate the call, man.
Thanks, guys.
Good stuff. So we determined that tight ends were elks, by the way. Someone referred to him as deer, and they said Theo Johnson ran like a gazelle, and I said tight ends can't be gazelles. Gazelles aren't big enough. You need something bigger than a gazelle to be a tight end. Someone called in, and then someone actually tweeted me a picture, Pearson, of an elk head next to a deer head. And elk is like halfway between a moose and a deer. So it's bigger than a deer, but not quite as big as a moose. But it's got big antlers and everything. So we determined you have the power of the horns and the elk to block, but the speed of the deer to run. So we determined an elk was a good animal for tight ends.
Bullwinkle was a moose.
Yeah, he was. That's an interesting factoid.
Just throwing it out there.
We decided defensive tackle was good for bears. because they can run, right? Bears can get up to a really high speed, but they're powerful. They got the big paws. They smack
George
people out
Young
of the
said
way.
the offensive linemen were elephants.
That's what we got.
I mean,
and that's what Shona Harry says. It's the parade of the elephants, right? So we went offensive line elephants. So now we determined rhinoceros is fullback. It's pretty good.
Okay.
And now bears for defensive tackles. So
and corners are cheetahs, right? And
yeah,
receivers
I
are
would,
panthers, right?
Would you want to go like
Jaguars? You want to go Jaguars for kick returners?
I mean, I think what if like
what are we doing, folks?
Well, why not? It's fun. It's the off season. We'll be back with more. You're the one that was naming superheroes for players. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, Burns calls himself Spidey. What was I going to do? Ignore it? I couldn't ignore it. He's Spidey, so I had to do something with that.
Oh, boy.
Right, the web. Shooting the web, baby.
Make that sound again?
Whatever the heck that is. I don't know. Shoot that web, baby.
We got to clip that sound.
Spider-Man.
Oh, my gosh. All right, thanks for joining us, everyone, on Big Blue Kickoff. And by the way, tickets for the Giants event on the 20th at the Theater of Madison Square, and there are still some tickets available. And again, you might be, when you go to Ticketmaster.com, you'll see they're a little bit high. It's a small theater, guys. There's no bad seats in the Theater of Madison Square Garden.
Right.
Go there, buy your seats, get in the building. It's going to be a great night. Make sure you go check it out. On Ticketmaster.com. And if you want Giants season tickets, the schedule is out, or individual tickets, it's Giants.com/tickets. And to watch all of our great content, download Giants TV on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. For Pearson Butler, who's done a good job running the show today, for Paul Dottino, I'm John Schmeelk. Hope you enjoyed this conversation today on Big Blue Kickoff Live. We will see you next time.
For the ones who know safety isn't a catchphrase, it's a culture. And the ones who help make sure everyone makes it home safe. For the safety-minded who watch everyone's backs, Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, as well as safety assessments and training to keep your facilities safe and your people safer. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.